In the Trump effect, the controversial Keystone Pipeline just cleared another hurdle. It's a win for President Trump and a big loss for the pipeline's opponents. Nebraska regulators approved a path for TransCanada Corporation's pipeline. The action removes a regulatory obstacle for the long-delayed project. Environmentalists have pointed to the pipeline as a symbol for the fight against fossil fuels and global warming. But business groups and President Trump say that it could lower fuel prices and create new jobs. Nebraska's approval comes just 4 days after the Keystone Pipeline leaked 210,000 gallons of oil in South Dakota, drawing more attention to the possible environmental impact. Officials say the spill was the largest in South Dakota history. Joining us now is Katie Bays, Senior Energy Analyst at Height Securities. Katie, good of you to join us. Are you surprised by Nebraska approving this?
Well, thank you for having me. And to be honest, we're not surprised that Nebraska approved the pipeline. I think the big surprise is in the fact that the approval comes for not the pipeline's preferred route, but for an alternate route that the State Department never studied when they were conducting their review of the project, which I think, as you've alluded to earlier in the program, does open some potential legal quagmires or problems for the project going forward.
And because of that new path, that means they now have to, and I guess they did it because they wanted away from more environmentally sensitive parts of Nebraska, and these new areas in Nebraska where they've approved the new path, that means that everybody involved now has to get permission from all of the local communities that would be affected, right?
Right, exactly. So the way that oil pipelines are permitted in the U.S. is typically very hands-off by regulators, but it does mean that the pipeline must work with landowners in order to obtain support for this new alternative route that, as far as we know, TransCanada never intended to pursue. So it is a little bit unclear in terms of how the State Department will react to this decision. Certainly Nebraska's authority over siting is binding, and there is no ability by any other federal regulator or other state to require a different route. But it does mean that there is likely some work ahead for TransCanada in terms of working with those landowners to try to come up with some kind of a workable solution. I think the one advantage of the alternative that the Nebraska Public Service Commission recognized is that it uses a lot of the existing Keystone Pipeline route, so there is not as much new territory that the pipeline needs to secure. You're using a lot of existing right-of-way, as you'd call it.
How much does all of this, though, delay the project? And let's just assume that because of Nebraska's general approval, this is going to move forward at some point. But the process of getting help and permission and everything, all the clearances at the local community level, how long does that push this back?
Right. Well, I would estimate that you're probably looking at another 6 months to perhaps a year of working with landowners to try to secure that right-of-way and conducting additional environmental analyses to make sure that the alternative route, which at this point is not very well defined, can be rather more clearly studied, and that environmental impacts associated with that route can be better understood. The other big portion of this is how long it would take for Keystone to solidify commitments from their potential shippers and ensure that they actually have the demand for pipeline capacity necessary to move the project forward. So with all of that kind of laying out in front of TransCanada, our estimate would be that perhaps construction could begin in early 19, and then the pipeline might complete construction enter service perhaps in 2020.
Yeah, and Katie,
that's kind of a round estimate, yeah.
I want to ask you in the 30 seconds we have left, any indication what caused that pipeline spill in South Dakota?
So there's nothing particularly reliable at this point, although it doesn't look like it was anything particularly sinister about the pipeline operation. It may have just been a failure in some of the components that hold the pipeline together, that there was a little bit of a leak there, and that 210,000 gallons is not insignificant, but for a pipeline of that size is a spill that would happen probably pretty quickly. So,
wow. Katie Bays.
I guess we'll find out as we go forward.
Katie Bays, Senior Energy Analyst at Height Securities. Katie, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.